people think libraries are gentle places, but mine is where I get judged quietly. I wear my name tag like armor, and I smile even when the patrons look past me. In Graybridge, a woman alone with a kid is a rumor waiting to happen in the aisles after closing. By the time the evening shift ends, my feet burn and my patience is thin. Eli needs a field trip fee, inhaler refills, and bedtime stories that make him believe the world is safe. I need a paycheck and a little mercy from strangers who never see how I try. That night, the board president cornered me with a request nobody else wanted. A rare leather-bound poetry book had to reach a donor at Orion Heights, penthouse level, immediately. The delivery stipend was $120, and it was around 10:40 at night. I said yes, because single moms always do. Rain hammered the sidewalk like it was angry at the city itself. I tucked the wrapped book under my coat and walked fast, head down, thinking of Eli's sleeping face. Streetlights smeared into gold on wet pavement, and every passing car felt too close as if it'd swallow me whole. Orion Heights rose black against the storm, all glass and cold confidence. The lobby smelled like money and disinfectant. A guard checked my ID, then waved me through as if I belonged there. The elevator whispered upward, quiet enough to hear my heart beating faster than it ever should tonight. The hallway outside the penthouse was carpeted so thick it swallowed my steps. I found the double doors and lifted my hand to knock, then stopped. One door sat slightly open, leaking warm light into the dark corridor. I hesitated, breathing, listening for permission that never came but felt required. I nudged the door and slipped inside, heart in my throat. The entryway was bigger than my apartment, and it smelled of leather, wood polish, and something clean like cedar. Somewhere deeper, a man's voice rolled through the air, reciting poetry like a confession from the book in my arms. Drawn forward, I followed the sound to a study with the door ajar. He sat with his back to me, broad shoulders hunched, dark shirt stretched across them. In his hand he turned a worn subway token, rubbing its edge with a tenderness that didn't match his size at all. He lifted the token and pressed it to his temple, eyes squeezed shut. For a second he looked less like a king and more like a man drowning in something private. My chest tightened. I took one step, meaning to announce myself, meaning to be polite. My breath betrayed me. The rug hid the floorboards, but one traitor's squeak escaped anyway. He was up and turning in a blink, the grief erased, replaced by a cold focus that pinned me. I froze, clutching the book, suddenly aware I had trespassed into a storm that belonged to him and nobody else. My thoughts scattered. I tried to explain the delivery, the donor request, the open door, everything at once. But panic makes language clumsy. I heard myself blurt that I only wanted to finish what he started for him, right here, before I could stop, and my face burned with shame. Silence landed heavy. His eyes moved from my mortified face to the wrapped book and back again, measuring. Whatever he expected, it wasn't me. The hard edge in him cracked. A short laugh burst out, rough and real, like thunder finally breaking, and I felt fear turn into pure embarrassment. He swallowed the laugh like it surprised him too, then took the package from my hands. His fingers brushed mine, warm against my cold skin, and I hated that it felt like a spark. He checked the title, then pressed folded cash into my palm more than the fee required. I nodded too many times, backed away, and escaped into the hallway like I was running from myself. The elevator doors closed, and only then did I exhale. My hands shook around the money and the empty air where the book had been. I felt foolish, and strangely seen too. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. I walked home replaying the moment his laughter broke the danger. I thought of Eli curled under his blanket at Ruth's apartment, and my stomach knotted. Whoever that man was, he carried grief like a weapon, and I had walked into it. Somewhere above the street, I knew he would still be near that window. I pictured the token in his hand and the poetry book on his desk, proof that softness existed in his world. In my kitchen, I held my sea glass and wondered why his laugh felt like mercy. I crawled into bed without sleeping, listening for footsteps in the hall, and scolding myself for imagining his eyes again. Tomorrow I would shelve books, stamp dates, and pretend nothing happened. But his laugh had opened something. What happens when a man like that decides he wants answers from me? The next morning I scrubbed the memory like a stain, but it clung to me. Rainwater, cedar, that sudden laugh. I shelved my embarrassment beside the returns bin, and told myself I would be normal, because normal is what keeps single moms alive in this town where people watch quietly. Graybridge Carnegie smelled the way safety should, paper and dust and lemon polish. The lamps glowed soft over the long tables. Kids' drawings hung near the story corner. I inhaled that calm and tried to believe it could erase what happened upstairs in Orion Heights night before. When I trembled. At home, Ruth had walked Eli to school, and she left a note about his lunch. I calculated bills while buttering toast, counting the $120 like it might change everything. It would not. It would only buy me time, and time is expensive, especially when your name becomes a whisper. By mid-morning, my hands had found their rhythm again, stamping due dates, scanning barcodes, smiling at strangers. I was halfway through reshelving biographies when the front bell chimed once, clean and sharp. I looked up and felt my stomach drop. He stood there like he had always belonged to us. Not the man from the penthouse, not in that hard, dark shirt. This version wore a simple gray sweater and plain coat, hair slightly damp as if the rain had followed him. He looked almost ordinary, and that felt more dangerous than luxury because it meant he was trying today. He approached my desk slowly, letting me see every step, as if sudden movements were forbidden here. My ears burned with the memory of my panic blurt. I expected anger or mockery. Instead, he tilted his head toward the shelves, searching for something that sounded like forgiveness in my mind. Without saying much, he made his request clear through gestures and the way his gaze lingered on my face. He wanted books about starting over, about second chances, about lives rebuilt after bad choices. The words should have been cliches. On him, they felt like truth, and it scared me. I guided him into the stacks, pretending my pulse was steady. We paused at a spine I recommended, and our hands almost met. I pulled back first, because I have a child and a rule. Touch is permission, not accident. Still, I felt heat where the air shifted between us. He listened while I described the books in simple terms, the way I do for patrons who need hope more than plot. He nodded, but his attention stayed on me, like my voice mattered more than the pages. I hated how that warmed me after weeks of feeling invisible everywhere. Even softened, he never relaxed fully. He chose a chair that faced the main aisle. His eyes tracked the door each time it opened. When a phone buzzed near the computers, his shoulders tightened, then smoothed again. I recognized that control as practice survival, the kind I use on playgrounds. When he finally left with one thin paperback, I watched him through the front windows. A black sedan idled across the street, engine running, driver not looking at a phone. Another man stood near the corner pretending to smoke, eyes moving in sweeps. My skin tightened. That was not normal. Motherhood rewired my senses years ago. I notice who watches the playground gate, who lingers by my building, who asks too many questions about Eli. Seeing that sedan and that smoker, I understood the quiet truth. My late-night stranger did not walk alone, and I had been invited into it. I returned to my cart and forced myself to work. The stamp pad thumped, soothing. Pages whispered as I slid books into place. I told myself to focus on dinner plans and homework sheets, but my mind kept circling one question, stubborn as rain. Why did he come back here? Just after lunch, the bell chimed again, louder this time. A man I did not recognize entered with a predator's patience. He scanned the room and practiced angles, taking inventory of exits, cameras, faces. Patrons shifted unconsciously away from him, like birds from a shadow, and I felt breath shorten. His gaze found Nico immediately, as if they shared a map I could not see. Nico's posture went still, sweater suddenly useless against whatever history stood between them. Then the man's eyes slid to me, pausing as if pinning my name to a file in his head for later use. I wanted to shrink behind the desk, to become the quiet librarian again. But Eli's face rose in my mind, and with it my old promise to keep our world steady. I stayed rooted, shoulders squared. This was my place, and I would protect it, even if fear returned today. That man didn't stroll into Graybridge Carnegie like a patron. He entered like an inspection, eyes sweeping the lamps, the exits, the faces, measuring how the room would react if he decided to break the rules. The air shifted around him, subtle as a cold draft. Conversations shrank to whispers. Even the printer at the public computers sounded too loud. I kept my hands on my cart of returns, forcing my shoulders down, pretending my pulse wasn't sprinting. Across the aisle, Nico sat with that thin paperback resting on his knee, but his attention snapped to the newcomer before I even saw the man's smile. Nico's face stayed calm, yet his body changed in small, dangerous ways. His spine straighter, his feet planted, his gaze following the man's hands. He rose slowly, angling himself so he was closer to me without looking like it. It felt like standing behind a wall that had quietly decided to protect me. The newcomer, Dane Crowley, spoke loud enough to bounce off the ceiling, the kind of volume that dared anyone to correct him. He let his eyes rake over Nico's sweater like it offended him, then over me like I was furniture. His grin carried the slick confidence of someone used to being feared, and I understood he hadn't come for books. He had come for a reaction. The library, my sanctuary, had become his stage. I should have frozen. Every sensible part of me said to stay behind the desk and let the two men handle whatever history crackled between them. But another part of me, older than romance and sharper than fear, woke up. The part that has told grown men to stop shouting near the children's corner. The part that has carried Eli on one hip while setting boundaries with the other hand. I stepped into the space between the shelves and lifted my chin. My voice came out calm, the way it does when Eli is testing me in the cereal aisle. I didn't threaten. I didn't plead. I simply reminded him, with librarian certainty, that this was a quiet area and everyone here deserved respect. I gestured toward the front desk, as if he were a teenager with a phone on speaker. For a beat, he looked genuinely confused, like he'd expected claws and got a clipboard. A few patrons glanced up, then returned to their books, trusting me without knowing why. Then the man's smile tightened. He leaned closer to the shelf, invading my space by inches, and I felt Nico shift again behind me, silent and immediate. Nico didn't touch me, but his presence moved like a shadow, blocking the angle between us. The newcomer's eyes flicked to Nico, and something like recognition sparked there, sharp and private. He scoffed, backing away with exaggerated patience, as if he was letting me win a game that didn't matter. But the look he left on Nico promised a different ending later. When he finally turned toward the doors, the room exhaled. My knees wobbled like I'd just walked off a ladder. I pretended to straighten a row of books, because that's what I do when my feelings get too loud. Nico's eyes stayed on the exit until the bell chimed behind the man's departure. Only then did Nico look at me, and for a second the hard control slipped, replaced by something close to amazement. His hand hovered near his coat pocket, fingers flexing as if he needed to touch that subway token to stay steady. I wanted to ask who he was, what he wanted, why Nico had looked like he'd seen a ghost, but the library teaches you that some questions can shatter glass. Instead, I focused on what I could control. My breathing, my posture, the calm mask I use for Eli. I checked the clock and remembered it was almost story time in the children's corner. Ruth had dropped Eli off for the afternoon program, a small kindness that let me work. I walked toward the bright rug area, half expecting danger to follow. Eli sat cross-legged with a paper crown from craft hour, cheeks pink with excitement. The moment he saw me, he lifted his arms in that wordless way that melts every fear. I scooped him close, breathing in shampoo and crayons. Nico stayed a respectful distance at first, but his gaze softened on Eli, careful like someone approaching a skittish animal. Eli studied him openly, then whispered into my neck that he had seen two men outside by the black car again, watching the door. My stomach tightened. I looked back at Nico's stillness and understood my safe place now had shadows attached. Later, when the children's librarian began reading, I sat with Eli and tried to listen. My mind kept replaying Dane's smile and Nico's quiet shift behind me. Nico remained near the back wall, eyes on exits, fingers brushing his pocket like a prayer. I found myself wanting the story behind that token, the promise he clung to. What kind of man needs metal to stay human for my sake? By the next Tuesday, I could predict his arrival the way I predicted Eli's afternoon mood swings. Not by the clock, but by a shift in the air. The bell over the front door would chime once, and a hush would follow, as if the building itself recognized a different kind of weight. Nico never brought an entourage inside. He came alone, sweater plain, eyes alert, and he moved through the stacks like someone walking a border between safety and threat. Thursdays became the same gentle ritual. I would pretend I wasn't watching the door, and he would pretend he hadn't come only to find me. We sat in the worn leather chairs near the biographies, close enough for our knees to nearly touch, far enough to keep my rules intact. The library did what it always did for me. It made feelings quieter. Even our almost laughter stayed small, tucked behind book spines and the soft thump of my stamp pad. Outside, life kept flashing warning signs. A black sedan would idle across the street at closing time. A man in a cap would drift past the windows twice, never entering, always scanning. I told myself it could be coincidence, but motherhood has taught me the math of danger. When you have a child, you stop believing in harmless patterns. Nico noticed my glances without calling them out. He simply positioned himself so I was never the closest body to the door. My curiosity about the subway token grew the way a splinter grows painful. Slowly, then all at once. I had seen it in the penthouse, pressed to his temple, and now I saw the habit return when anything startled him. He would slide 2 fingers into his pocket, rub the edge, breathe, and the steel in his gaze would soften by a shade. One late Thursday, after the last patron left and the lights dimmed, we walked the few blocks toward my building, letting the city noise cover our silence. At the corner where streetlights reflected in a puddle, I finally asked, not with my voice but with the way I looked at his hand. He understood. He stopped, palm opening, the token resting there like an old scar. What he shared came in fragments that I stitched together later. Years ago there had been a night when he crossed a line he could not uncross. He left a place he hated himself for, walked in the rain until his lungs hurt, and saw the token stuck in a crack of sidewalk, shining under a yellow lamp. He picked it up because it was small, worthless, and somehow honest. In his mind, he made a promise to become less wrong, to build something that didn't depend on fear, and to never forget the man he had been. I let that settle between us. The air smelled like wet leaves and distant traffic, and for a few seconds neither of us moved. Then I reached under my sweater collar and pulled out my sea glass pendant, a dull green shard smoothed by water. I told him what it meant without making it dramatic. My mother had given it to me the week she got sick, back when I still believed adults couldn't disappear. Later, after she was gone and Eli's father was gone in his own way, that little piece of glass became my anchor. Smooth didn't mean perfect. Smooth meant it survived being thrown around. I carried it on the nights I cried quietly so Eli wouldn't hear. Nico held out his hand again, and I placed the pendant in his palm beside the token. Metal and glass, one manufactured, one made by waves, both worn down by time. His hand was large enough to hide them, yet he didn't close his fingers right away. He stared as if he could read our histories in their edges. Something in my chest loosened, not like a rush, but like a knot finally giving up. It felt more intimate than any kiss I'd had since becoming a mother, because it asked for nothing and offered everything. But when he finally closed his fist, I saw the other hand, the one he thought I wouldn't notice. The knuckles were scraped raw, a faint bruise blooming along his wrist, like spilled ink. He caught me looking and went still, the softness trying to retreat behind control. I didn't ask what happened. I just felt my protective instincts flare, the same way they do when Eli comes home with a mysterious scratch. Kindness and danger were living in the same body, in the same quiet breath, and I let him close. If he could sit with me like this and still carry bruises home, what would his help cost when my life got harder? Golden weeks can make you believe you're safe until the next bill lands on the counter. For a while, Graybridge Carnegie felt warmer. Nico kept showing up on Tuesdays and Thursdays with a book tucked under his arm, sweater plain, eyes alert. I told myself it was just quiet conversation, nothing that could reach beyond the stacks. Still, I caught myself listening for the door chime, smiling before he even reached my aisle. That scared me. I am a mother first, and hope is the most reckless thing I allow myself. The first time he touched me on purpose, it was almost nothing. We were locking up, and I was reaching for the light switch when he stepped close and cupped my cheek. His hand was warm, careful, like he was handling something breakable. I let my eyes close for half a second, then pulled back, because Eli was waiting upstairs with Ruth. Our kiss was brief and restrained, more relief than heat, like exhaling after years of holding my breath. Fear came back fast. A few days later, Eli's inhaler refill turned into a mess. The pharmacy blamed the insurance system. The clinic was booked. I heard Eli wheeze in his sleep, and it made my skin crawl with helplessness. I made calls on my lunch break, begged in my nicest voice, promised I would pay whatever I had to. By late afternoon, a nurse called me back with an appointment slot that had opened out of nowhere. The inhaler was ready before bedtime. Nico hadn't said a word, but the world had moved around my child like a chess piece sliding into safety. He never bragged. He never handed me a receipt and waited for gratitude. He just looked calmer the next time he saw Eli breathing easy, as if my son's lungs mattered to him in a way my pride didn't. I was grateful, and I hated how grateful I was. Dead is how people get owned, and I have spent too long rebuilding my life from other people's decisions. The truth was simple. He wanted closeness. He wanted to be the one I leaned on. Then my electricity bill disappeared. I had been bracing for a shut-off notice, counting pennies, planning which groceries to cut. One morning I logged into my account and saw the balance at $0. No warning, no explanation, just gone. Relief hit first, hot and dizzy, then anger followed, cold and sharp. I hadn't asked. I hadn't agreed. Someone had reached into my life like it belonged to them. Help can feel like a leash when you didn't choose it. I tried to tell myself I could repay him. I considered baking something, offering cash, anything that would make the balance feel fair. But every idea sounded childish beside his quiet efficiency. What he offered wasn't a favor. It was access, influence, a hand on the wheel of my life all along. That evening, I tried to set boundaries without turning it into a fight. I told him, as gently as I could, that support has to be offered, not imposed, because Eli and I have survived too much to hand our steering wheel to anyone. He listened with a stillness that made it hard to read him. When he reached for my hand, I let him take it, but I watched my own fingers the way you watch a door lock. Trust isn't a switch. It's a slow animal you feed carefully. Jason Pike showed up the next afternoon near the library steps wearing his friendly face, the one strangers always believe. To anyone watching, he looked like an involved father checking in. To me, he looked like history sharpening its teeth. He spoke with casual charm that hid threats, hinting custody could be revisited, hinting that a woman who keeps strange company can lose more than sleep. He mentioned money too, like he deserved a cut of my life because he once helped create it. Shame and rage rose together in my throat. Nico appeared behind me without a sound, not inserting himself, just existing like a presence that changed the temperature. Jason noticed immediately. His smile flickered, then widened, and the way he looked Nico over told me he understood power. Nico stayed neutral, but his eyes measured Jason the way I sort returns into categories. I realized Nico was memorizing him. After Jason walked away, Nico let a small detail slip that stopped me cold. Something that proved he knew about Jason's unpaid tickets and his last address. I had never told him any of that. Across the street, Jason leaned against his car with his phone in hand, shoulders loose with satisfaction. He typed fast, glanced up at the library, and smiled like a deal had just been sealed. My skin went cold. Someone was pushing buttons around my life, and I couldn't tell if Nico was my shelter or the storm. When I got home, Ruth's porch light was on, and the look she gave me said she had discovered something I wasn't ready to hear. Ruth was waiting in the hallway when I climbed the stairs, porch light washing her face into pale gold. Eli was already asleep in her apartment, she whispered earlier. But tonight her silence was different, heavier than bedtime. She had done what grandmothers do when they love hard. She had watched, asked, listened, and then called the few people in Graybridge who still owed her favors. She told me she recognized the pattern the moment she saw the black sedan idling near the library, and the moment I came home with cash I could not explain. Then she said Nico Blackwood was not a quiet businessman with a stressful job. He was the name people lowered their voices for. He ran the Blackwood organization, the shadow spine that held half the city's illegal peace in place. The man I had let close to my son was the most feared power in Graybridge's underworld. I sat down too fast, knees weak, and my mind began replaying the last month like a film rewinding itself. The watchers outside the library were not coincidence. Dane Crowley's recognition was not random rudeness. The fast inhaler appointment was not luck. The $0 bill was not mercy from the utility company. Nico's careful answers were not shyness. They were strategy. They were control. She said she had seen men like him before, men who wanted to be good, but lived inside a machine that punished softness. She said the machine would use me, and it would use Eli, because children are leverage even when adults pretend they are not. My throat burned with anger, but underneath it was something worse. Humiliation. I had built a safe little life out of routines and library quiet. I had guarded it with my body and my pride, and still I had let a stranger rearrange my world with a phone call. Nico came to my door the next evening with a paperback, hopeful enough to make my chest ache. Eli was asleep in the back room, his small breath steady, and I kept my voice low because motherhood teaches you to fight without waking the innocent. I did not invite Nico in. I stood in the doorway like a border guard, heart pounding, hands clenched around my sea glass. I asked him the question Ruth had handed me, the one that could not be softened. He did not deny it. His face tightened for a fraction of a second, then went still, and his eyes held mine with a heavy honesty. He let the truth land between us without excuses. He tried to explain in the only way he could. He made me understand that the gentle man in the library was real, not a costume. He said he had been trying to change long before he met me, and meeting me made the change feel possible. He admitted fear. He admitted he hid his name because he did not want to watch the light in me go out. I wanted to believe him so badly that it frightened me. I remembered his hand on my cheek, his careful distance around Eli, the token he rubbed like a prayer. I also remembered Dane's smile, the bruises Nico carried, and the way my electricity bill vanished without my consent. Love was not the problem. Secrecy was. I told him that my son did not get to gamble on a man's redemption. Eli deserved safety that did not require bodyguards. He deserved a home where the biggest threat was a spilled cup, not a rival with a grudge. I told Nico to leave, and this time my voice did not shake. I felt my own heart break, clean and loud, while the hallway stayed quiet. Nico did not argue. He looked at me like he was memorizing my face for a famine. Then he stepped back, nodded once, and walked away down the stairs, carrying the book he had brought, like it weighed more than stone. I closed my door and leaned against it, breathing through the ache, trying not to cry hard enough to wake Eli. The apartment felt smaller, like the walls had moved in. I held my sea glass until my palm hurt, wishing smooth things could fix sharp pain. A knock came a few minutes later. I opened the door expecting Ruth, but found an envelope on the mat. Official, stiff, stamped with the county seal. My hand started shaking before I even read it, because paperwork has always been a weapon pointed at mothers like me. Inside was a notice scheduling a child welfare visit, framed in polite language that still felt like an accusation. Someone had reported concerns about my home environment. I did not need a signature to guess the source. Jason's smile outside the library flashed in my mind, and the way he had typed with satisfaction. He had promised he could make my life difficult, and now the system itself was knocking. I felt cold dread spread through me, heavier than any fear I had felt in Nico's penthouse. I stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to Eli breathe, realizing I had stepped into a story where love could be used against me. Nico was gone, my heart was cracked, and tomorrow I would be judged by strangers with clipboards. Whatever I thought I understood was over. The punishment was just beginning. I went back to Graybridge Carnegie like a ghost wearing a cardigan. My hands did the work without me, stamping dates, sliding books into place, smiling when people asked for help. Every aisle held an echo of him. Not the dangerous name, just the quiet man in a sweater who had looked at me like I mattered. I kept expecting the bell to chime and his shadow to fall across my desk. It never did. The silence felt louder. Even the children's corner, usually bright, seemed muted, as if the building knew my heart had cracked and I could not. The official envelope lived in my bag like a bomb I carried through public spaces. Every time I felt its stiff edge, my stomach tightened. Child welfare visits sound polite on paper, but they feel like strangers walking through your drawers and judging your love. I cleaned my apartment twice, then a third time, scrubbing fingerprints off the fridge like I could erase my mistakes. I practiced calm in the mirror for Eli's sake. I told myself this was just procedure, yet shame followed me down every stairwell. In Graybridge, a single mom is guilty until proven spotless by everyone. At night, when Eli slept, I held my sea glass and stared at the ceiling. I tried to hate Nico for lying by omission, for rearranging my life without asking, for making my heart soft when it needed armor. But the memory of his hand opening to show that worn token kept returning. I imagined it cold against his palm. Imagined him rubbing its edge the way people rub worry into shapes. I wondered if he had touched it after leaving my hallway, if he had felt the same hollow ache. Missing him felt dangerous, and that made it worse. 2 days before the scheduled visit, A man I had never seen inside the library stepped through the doors and did not pretend to browse. He moved with the quiet focus of someone trained to read rooms. He wore a plain jacket, but his eyes made him unmistakable. He approached my desk with respectful distance, hands visible, posture controlled. I knew he belonged to Nico's world, the same way the sedan belonged, the same way Dane's grin belonged. He did not intimidate me, yet urgency hung around him like weather. When he said Nico's name, I felt my ribs tighten. He introduced himself as Miles Ward, and I could tell he was choosing courtesy on purpose. In careful sentences, he made me understand that Nico had been cutting ties, pushing money into legitimate channels, refusing certain deals, and that it had rattled people who only respect fear. Dane's visit to the library had been a message. The attempt at the penthouse would be worse. Miles did not need to describe details. His face did it for him. He said the move was happening tonight, before midnight, and that Nico was isolated because pride kept him from reaching for me first. My first instinct was to protect Eli by staying away from all of it. If I never saw Nico again, maybe the shadows would stop circling our door. Then I pictured Dane's eyes on me in the stacks, and the official notice in my bag, and I understood the truth. The shadows had already found us. I picked Eli up after school with my smile glued on, then went through his backpack at the kitchen table, checking for homework. A folded paper crane slid out, white, tucked like a secret. My hands went numb. I recognized it from Dane today. That was the moment heartbreak stopped leading me. Fear took over, maternal and sharp, and it burned away hesitation. I called Ruth with a steadiness I did not feel, and asked her to keep Eli overnight. No questions, just trust. She saw my face and agreed, distracting him with warm milk and a story. I kissed the top of his head, breathing him in, memorizing the weight of him. Then I stepped into the hallway and let the door click shut. My hands shook, but my spine stayed upright. I wasn't running from danger anymore. I was walking toward it. Miles waited by the curb in an unmarked car, engine low, eyes scanning the street. I climbed in, and the door closed with a soft, final sound that made my pulse jump. He drove steady, as if speed would invite attention. Streetlights slid across the windshield like moving bars. I watched the city pass and realized I was leaving my old life behind again, not for thrill, but because I refused to be hunted quietly. Ahead, Nico was facing the storm alone. I was done letting fear decide. Whatever waited in that penthouse, I would meet it awake this time. Ruth's apartment smelled like lavender soap and warm bread, the kind of scent that makes you believe storms are temporary. Eli was already in pajamas, cheeks flushed from being fussed over. I packed his inhaler, his favorite dinosaur book, and the sea glass pendant I never removed. At the bedroom door, I paused, listening to his small breathing. I promised him silently that I would come back whole. Then I kissed his hair, thanked Ruth with my eyes, and stepped into the hallway alone tonight. Miles waited by the curb in a dark sedan that looked ordinary until you noticed how the driver watched mirrors instead of phones. I slid into the back seat and the door shut with a soft, final click. My heart raced, but my voice stayed steady, because mothers learn that panic is contagious. The city felt muted, storefronts closing early, streets slick from earlier rain. Miles kept scanning intersections. He did not ask if I was sure, because he knew I already was before midnight. Orion Heights rose ahead like a blade against the night sky, glass reflecting lights like warning signals. The lobby was too clean, too quiet, and the guard at the desk looked relieved to see Miles, not surprised. That told me everything. We moved fast, but not frantic, crossing marble that amplified every step. The elevator accepted a key card and lifted us upward without a sound. Each floor number sliding past felt like a countdown, pulling me away from Eli and deeper into Nico's world. The doors opened to a hush that felt wrong, like a room holding its breath. A vase lay shattered, and a chair was overturned on its side. The air smelled of cedar, sweat, and something metallic I refused to name. Nico stood near the windows, shoulders squared, a cut above his brow darkening his skin. He was alive, but not untouched. 2 men were on the floor behind him, groaning, bound. Miles moved past me, efficient, while I fought to keep my knees steady upright. Dane Crowley leaned against the far wall as if the penthouse belonged to him, smile lazy and cruel. He talked like this was entertainment, like Nico's injuries were punchlines, and he kept glancing at the elevator, satisfied I had stayed away. Nico's face stayed unreadable, yet I saw tension in his jaw, the way his hand hovered near his pocket, grounding himself. I wanted to run, but my feet would not move. I had walked into this storm, and now it looked at me. I moved before I could overthink, stepping between them, palms open. Dane blinked, surprised that someone soft would block his path. My voice stayed low and steady, the way it does with Eli and with patrons who forget themselves. I did not bargain or threaten. I held one stubborn truth in my mind. Cruelty is easy, change is hard, and a man fighting his own worst instincts is more dangerous than a man who enjoys harm. I chose to believe Nico could still choose better. For a heartbeat, the room froze, as if the city outside paused to listen. Dane's confidence wavered because my words did not fit his script. He was used to threats and fear, not a mother standing like a stop sign. I saw him calculate, searching for a response that would restore his power. Behind me, Nico shifted, silent and controlled, waiting for an opening. I felt the air tighten, yet I held my ground, thinking of Eli's paper crane and predators who hate being seen. Nico moved in a blur, not wild, just precise. He stepped around me, guided me back with a hand at my shoulder, and closed the distance. There was a brief struggle of bodies and breath, then a clatter as something metal hit the floor. Dane's confidence cracked. Miles was there instantly, pinning Dane's arms and restraining him with practiced ease. Silence rushed back in, stunned. My hands shook, but the danger had shifted away from me. I heard my heartbeat and Nico's breathing beside me. When it was over, Nico turned to me with fear in his eyes that did not match his reputation. He checked me first, not himself, as if my presence had been the real risk. I realized he was shaking too, hidden under control. Miles guided Dane away, leaving the penthouse quiet again. I stood where Nico had pushed me, trying to steady my breath. Nico reached toward my face, then stopped, waiting for permission. That restraint hit me harder than the struggle. Love felt costly. I wanted to collapse into his arms, but Eli's face rose in my mind. If I stayed in Nico's life, it could not be the old way, with secrets and hands moving my world. The silence after danger made my own boundaries form. I would choose him, but only with rules. Truth, always. No more surprises, no more hidden rescues. My son's safety first, even above my feelings. When Miles returned, I looked at Nico's bruised brow and knew our next talk would decide everything. The penthouse fell silent in a way that made my ears ring. Broken glass glittered under the lamp, and the overturned chair looked like proof that fear leaves fingerprints. Nico's cut had stopped bleeding, but the dark line above his brow made him look younger and older at once. My hands wouldn't stop trembling, not from what I'd seen, but from what I'd chosen. Miles moved efficiently in the background while I tried to breathe like a normal person again. In that hush, I felt something settle inside me, firmer than romance and steadier than panic. I could still care about him, even love him, but love without structure had nearly gotten me and my son swallowed whole. So I held my sea glass in my pocket and decided that if Nico wanted any part of my life, the truth would not be optional anymore. I wasn't asking for perfection. I was demanding honesty, because Eli deserved it, and so did I from this moment. My rules formed fast, clean, and non-negotiable. No half-truths tucked behind gentle smiles. No secret rescues that fixed my bills or my appointments without my consent. No watching my street, my phone, my friends, or my child's school like I was a target you owned. If help was offered, I had to be able to say yes or no, and Eli would never be leverage. Not in a fight, not in a favor, not in a warning. He was off limits forever in my world. I watched Nico absorb those boundaries like a man swallowing medicine. He didn't flinch into anger. He didn't try to charm me out of them. His eyes kept flicking to the elevator, to the shattered vase, to my hands, as if he could still see me stepping between him and Dane. The fear on his face wasn't fear of losing power. It was fear of me getting hurt because of him. When he nodded, it felt like surrender and promise at the same time. Real. Once the room was secured, Nico guided me toward his study, keeping distance until I allowed it. On the desk sat the same leather-bound poetry book I had delivered that stormy night. He let me understand it wasn't a casual request. It had been his mother's. She worked in a neighborhood library when he was small, and she brought him home stories like medicine. In his mind, Shelves, whispers, and lamplight were the first safe place he ever trusted. He spoke of her softly. The subway token finally made sense. It wasn't a criminal charm. It was his mother's, worn smooth by her thumb. After she died, he kept it as proof he had once been loved without conditions. Years later, on a night he regretted, he found it in a drawer and slipped it into his pocket before walking into the rain. He used it to remember her standard for him and to choose gentleness over impulse. When his fingers worried its edge, he was recommitting to promise. Standing there, I realized Nico hadn't sought me out like a predator. He had drifted toward the library because it was the closest thing to home he could admit needing. The sweater, the quiet voice, the careful distance were his attempt to belong in that safety for an hour. And I, with my stamp pad and my rules, represented the order he kept reaching for. The thought softened me and unsettled me. It wasn't fate. It was gravity. And gravity can pull you into ruin. Miles returned, voice low, eyes scanning the hall. I gathered from him that tonight had been a probe, not a finish. Dane had tested Nico's defenses and learned exactly where compassion slows him. Rivals would not strike the penthouse again first. They would pivot to the easiest pressure point, the woman and child who make Nico hesitate. Miles didn't have to speak Eli's name for my stomach to drop. My body reacted first, fear spreading cold and fast beneath my ribs in the quiet air. I looked at Nico, then at the elevator that led back to Eli across town. My rules still stood, but rules alone couldn't stop a wave. Nico's eyes asked permission without words, and I gave it. I accepted a temporary relocation plan, what Miles called a safe arrangement, until the city cooled. The thought made my skin itch. Safety with guards can feel like captivity, yet the alternative was pretending danger wouldn't follow me home, and I could not afford that lie as a mother. Later that night, while Miles arranged the aftermath, I stared out at the lights and pictured Eli waking to a different routine. I would pack his clothes, his inhaler, his school folder, and his dinosaur book, then explain a sudden move without giving him fear. The sea glass warmed my skin. I imagined Nico's token cold in his pocket, 2 anchors for 2 adults trying to choose better. The plan sounded tidy. In reality, it meant guards, locked doors, and learning exits. Love wasn't just feeling now, it was preparation. By early morning, I was packing Eli's life into a backpack and a single rolling suitcase. The safe plan sounded simple when Miles explained it. In reality, it felt like I was admitting my apartment could be breached, that my little routines were not enough. I folded Eli's pajamas, lined up his inhaler, tucked the dinosaur book under the zipper, and forced my hands not to shake. I told him we were going to sleep somewhere different for a bit, like a mini adventure. And he accepted it because kids believe the adults who love them. Miles drove us to a townhouse on the quiet edge of the city, where the sidewalks were clean and the trees looked planted on purpose. From the outside, it could have been a realtor's dream. Brick steps, soft porch light, curtains that glowed warm. Inside, it smelled too new, like fresh paint and unopened boxes. The couch was plush, the kitchen spotless, the bedrooms quiet enough to hear the refrigerator hum, yet every comfort came with a click. Doors locked automatically. A camera blinked above the garage. A man I never met stood on the back patio pretending to admire the yard, while his eyes tracked the alley. I realized the house wasn't built to live in, it was built to hold. Daylight made everything feel less dramatic and more complicated. Nico arrived mid-morning without fanfare. No suit, no swagger, only a bruised shadow under his eye, and a careful distance he kept like a promise. I watched him the way I watch strangers near Eli, measuring tone, hands, patience. Eli watched back with the ruthless honesty of a 6-year-old. Nico crouched to Eli's level and offered nothing but attention, waiting to be allowed. When Eli finally stepped closer, it wasn't because Nico was powerful. It was because Nico looked genuinely relieved to see him smiling. That small moment warmed me, then scared me, because trust grows fast in children and breaks even faster. Ruth came that afternoon with a grocery bag and her sharp eyes. She didn't gush over the townhouse or soften for Nico's presence. She checked corners, noted locks, asked Eli if he felt okay, and then watched Nico the way librarians watch noisy teenagers, calmly, with authority. Nico didn't try to win her. He made tea, kept his voice low, and stayed on the far side of the room, unless Ruth's gaze said otherwise. I saw something shift between them, not acceptance, but a temporary truce built on behavior. Ruth didn't trust names. She trusted patterns. While Eli colored at the table, Nico's phone kept lighting up with calls he didn't always take. When he did, he spoke in short, controlled bursts, and I could hear the effort it cost him to stay calm. Lawyers, accountants, audits, meetings that sounded like a man dismantling his own throne piece by piece. Miles brought folders, and Nico signed papers with the same steady hand that had held my face. It was hopeful in the most terrifying way. Every legitimate step he took pulled him away from the underworld, and I could feel enemies tightening their grip somewhere outside these walls. 2 nights later, the world closed in from a different direction. A man in a suit arrived with a sealed packet, and the kind of polite urgency that makes your skin crawl. I understood enough from Nico's tightened shoulders to know it was federal pressure, not rumor. The choice in front of him was brutal. Cooperate, open books, name names, risk losing everything, or fight it and keep the armor on. I expected anger. I expected Nico to choose power. Instead, he chose lawful vulnerability. He chose the path that could ruin his status and still keep Eli breathing easy. Watching that decision, I felt sober respect settle over fear. That respect didn't erase the dread waiting for me on my phone. Just before bedtime, a notification popped up from the court portal I barely knew how to use, followed by a voicemail from Jason that sounded sweet on the surface and sharp underneath. I stared at the screen and understood the next battlefield would not be a penthouse. It would be paperwork, custody schedules, and strangers deciding what kind of mother I was. The townhouse lights glowed warm, but I suddenly felt bars. I checked the locks, then watched Eli fall asleep in a room that wasn't his, clutching the dinosaur book like it could anchor him. Outside, a car rolled past, and the guard at the window tracked it anyway. I told myself this was protection, not possession, yet I stayed on alert. Nico was choosing to lose power for us, and still the system was lining up to judge me. Tomorrow, I would have to prove my motherhood on paper. Jason filed on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day that still manages to change your life. I learned about it from a notification that popped up while I was packing Eli's snack bag. A petition, a hearing date, a request for emergency restrictions, all wrapped in polite language that suggested I was careless and unstable. My hands went cold. I pictured Eli's face, then pictured strangers deciding whether I deserved him. By the time court day came, my nerves felt like exposed wire. The courthouse smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. The metal detector line moved in slow shuffles, and I kept thinking how unfair it was that I had to empty my pockets like a suspect just to prove I was a mother. I held Eli's school photo in my wallet as if it were identification. Every glance from a security guard felt like judgment. Jason sat across the hallway wearing his harmless smile, the one that fools people who have never been cornered by him. He looked relaxed, like this was a game he had rehearsed. I wanted to scream that he didn't pack lunches or check inhalers or wake up at 3 a.m. when Eli coughed. Instead, I swallowed my anger and focused on breathing, because losing my temper would be used as proof. Nico did not come into the courthouse like a king. He came like a man who had agreed to my rules. He stayed back, dressed plainly, hands empty, face controlled. He did not glare at Jason. He did not whisper threats. He only made sure my lawyer had every document we needed and that I had a bottle of water when my throat went dry. His restraint cost him. I could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the way his fingers brushed the edge of his pocket as if the token was the only thing keeping him steady. Ruth arrived with the calm of someone who has lived through worse storms than gossip. She wore her best coat, hair neat, posture straight. She did not try to charm anyone. She simply existed as proof that I had stability and community, that Eli had a second home with her, that my life was not chaos. When the clerk called her name, she walked forward without hesitation, and my chest loosened a fraction. In the waiting area, I spotted familiar faces from the library. Mrs. Henderson from the front desk gave me a small nod. A parent from Storytime touched my shoulder briefly, then sat down again like she was afraid to make a scene. Those tiny gestures mattered more than anyone in that building could understand. They reminded me I was not alone, even if my story had been twisted into rumors. Inside the courtroom, everything moved in careful steps. Questions, answers, pauses that felt like traps. Jason tried to paint me as reckless by hinting at dangerous company and unstable housing. He kept sliding toward the idea that my choices endangered Eli. Each word felt like a paper cut, small but relentless. I kept my gaze steady and let my lawyer speak. I reminded myself that truth is slow, but it holds. Then Jason cracked. It was not dramatic. It was a slip, a contradiction, a moment where he glanced at the door as if expecting someone to appear and rescue him. Under pressure, his story tangled. He admitted, almost by accident, that he had been nudged into filing, that someone had promised him money and leverage if he made my life messy. The name he avoided was still obvious. I saw it in the way his mouth tightened when Dane Crowley was mentioned in a document. I understood Jason had not acted alone. He had been used, and he had been willing. The judge did not look impressed by manipulation. The court didn't care about street pride. It cared about credibility. By the end, the outcome leaned toward me. Not a fairy tale victory, not a clean ending, but a clear message that Eli's routine and my caregiving mattered. The emergency restrictions were denied. The schedule stayed stable. I felt my knees go weak with relief. Outside, the air tasted sharp and cold. Nico walked beside me without touching until I reached for him first. Ruth squeezed my hand once, quick and firm, then went to call Eli's school to confirm pickup. I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt watched. Jason stood near his car, phone in hand, face tight with embarrassment and anger. In the distance, an unfamiliar sedan rolled past too slowly. My skin prickled, as if warned. Winning in court had exposed something bigger than my custody case. It had exposed a network that preferred shadows to sunlight. Cornered people do not become kind. They become desperate. As we drove back toward the townhouse, I stared out the window and tried to imagine weeks from now, months from now, rebuilding normal in small pieces. The court could sign papers, but it could not erase a grudge. I could feel one last ripple coming. A few months later, Graybridge Carnegie looked like itself again. Folding chairs lined the central aisle, paper snowflakes hung from the balcony rail, and the air carried cinnamon from donated cookies cooling on the front desk. Kids' laughter bounced off the high ceilings, bright and ordinary, the kind of sound that tells you a place is healing. I still noticed every exit. I still tracked every unfamiliar car that slowed near the curb. That part of me will probably never go away. But the fear no longer ran my life by itself. The court schedule settled into something predictable. The county visit ended with polite notes and no further action. Jason's threats lost traction once his lies unraveled. None of it felt like a fairy tale victory. It felt like work, and I was finally good at the work. Tonight was the library's reading night fundraiser, a small-town event that kept the lights on for the children's programs. Ruth Delaney was in her element, practical and bossy in the sweetest way, arranging bookmarks, correcting the angle of the microphone, and reminding me to eat something besides nerves. I watched her move through the room like a lighthouse, steady and unbothered. Eli sat cross-legged in the kids' corner with his dinosaur book in his lap, whisper reading to himself while he waited for story time. His inhaler was in my bag, right where it belonged. I checked it anyway, because motherhood is repetition disguised as love. When I looked up, I saw Nico enter. He didn't arrive like a boss. He arrived like a man who understood he was a guest in my world. Simple coat, hands visible, no crowd behind him. He paused at the door, letting his eyes adjust, letting me see he wasn't here to take over anything. He met my gaze and waited for my smallest nod before coming closer. That restraint was the loudest apology he could offer. Eli spotted him before I could. He launched himself across the carpet with the fearless certainty only children have, and Nico crouched automatically, catching him without pulling him too tight. Eli's smile did something to Nico's face that no power ever could. It softened him into someone almost ordinary. Watching them, my chest loosened, and I let myself breathe all the way down for the first time in a long time. Ruth watched too, eyes sharp. Later, when she handed Nico a plate of cookies like it was a test, I understood the truth I hadn't seen at first. Ruth hadn't simply accepted him after the chaos. She had been measuring him every day since. She had watched whether he respected my boundaries, whether he kept his distance when Eli needed space, whether he solved problems by controlling or by listening. Her approval was never a gift. It was a verdict earned in small moments. When story time began, I took the microphone and read a chapter from Eli's favorite adventure book, my voice steadier than it used to be. Nico stayed in the back, close enough to be present, far enough to let me lead, His eyes tracked the room out of habit, but he didn't make the room revolve around him. That was the difference. Afterward, in the quiet cleanup, I felt the sea glass pendant warm against my skin. Nico's subway token rested in his palm when he absent-mindedly rubbed its edge, and for once it didn't scare me. It reminded me of his mother, of the library as his first safe place, of the fact that people can be built two ways, by fear or by love. I slipped my sea glass into his hand beside the token the way I had months ago. Metal and glass, worn down, still here. That is what we built after the fire. Not perfection, not a fantasy where darkness disappears. We built rules. We built routines. We built a life where a powerful man learned to ask instead of take, and a tired single mom learned she was allowed to demand truth. We built safety the only way it lasts. One choice at a time, every day. Sometimes I still wake up and check the windows, because healing does not erase instinct. But now I also wake up to Eli's laugh, Ruth's steady presence, and Nico's quiet effort. The token and the sea glass remind me that survival can become a home when we choose it again tomorrow. If you were in my place, would you walk away the moment you learned the truth? Or would you stay and insist on change with your eyes open? Tell me what you would choose and what real safety means to you. And if this story moved you, help it reach someone who needs hope by liking, sharing, and following for the next chapter.